You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my program. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And that is ODYSY1.com. Go over, check it out. Check out all the places where we broadcast. It's a national syndication, so you can go anywhere, hear this show. As well as some terrestrial stations, which is kind of nice. So go check it out. Also, come over to my YouTube channel, check out the video, the live video simulcast of this program at my YouTube channel, Mr. Scotty Roberts. And you can join the rest of the Intrepids, as I like to call them, those faithful followers who like to come in and comment and have dialogue and talk back and forth. There's a little bit of a family that's brewing over there over the last couple of months. And some of the same people that join us over on Rocky Stucci's Situation Room, usually broadcast an hour after this show ends. But it's Friday, so his show has already played early this morning at midnight out east, which made it our Friday show on Rocky's station, Rocky's show, program, blah, blah. All right, it's Friday. And I'm getting tongue-tied. I don't know why. Maybe my mouth is moving faster than my mind. My brain is controlling things. So there you go. Thanks for being here. Let's move on with today's program. I'm going to pick up where we left off yesterday, talking about paganism, talking about some things. I want to talk about the high places and what the paganism looked like a little bit in Old Testament times, talking about when we're really in this whole series started as a comparing of Christianity to paganism, and is there compatibility there if you wanted to blend those faith traditions. And so what I just went blank for a moment there. I don't know why. I don't know what I was going to say next. So that's how we started this series, and we're going to pick that up, and we're going to look at that a little bit. But before we do, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a few weeks ago, I made a couple of book recommendations to you. Now, you know, I've talked on this show about the necessity of building spirituality in our kids. And I think one of the things that does that is the way we read to our kids, the things we read to them, the things that we let come in through the eye gate, the things that affect their brain, the things they hear, and so on. And so I've always liked to read books to my kids. And I've done this, as many of you know, and as I've said before, I've got a set of 3 kids from a previous marriage I've got twin daughters who are 27 and a son who's 18. And now I have 3 kids with my wife, Rainey, who are 10, 7, and 4. And so I've got that little gap in there between, it's a gap of about 9 years. And so I read to my 3 early kids who are now older, and I read to my kids now. And so I encourage you to take every opportunity you can. If you can, make a regular time in your day to read to your kids, if you've got kids. And if you don't have kids, read to yourself. Read for yourself. And I think that kids need to hear their parents read. They need to hear stories. They need to hear us talk about these things. If you don't read stories, tell stories. If you don't tell stories, sing a song. If you don't sing a song, tell a poem. I used to read poetry to my kids at bedtime. And so I've got this book that I recommended, and this is the reason I bring this up. Lauren Wolk's Beyond the Bright Sea. And she also wrote another one, Wolf Hollow. And I loved both of these books. And I read both of these to my children last year. And I wanted to start today by reading just the opening of this book to you, and so you get a feel for it. First, I'm going to read what's on the flyleaf, so you get an idea of what this book is all about. This is Beyond the Bright Sea by Lauren Wolk. And by the way, if you've ever read books like, older book, of course, To Kill a Mockingbird, a classic, this has kind of a modern To Kill a Mockingbird feel about it. Different themes, different topics, but I love the way she writes. Now, this is in the flyleaf here as you open up the book. This is what made me pick this book up. 12-year-old Crow has lived her entire life on a tiny, isolated piece of starkly beautiful Elizabeth Islands in Massachusetts. Abandoned and set adrift in a small boat when she was just hours old, Crow's only companions are Osh, the man who rescued and raised her, and Miss Maggie, their fierce and affectionate neighbor across the sandbar. Crow has always been curious about the world around her, but it isn't until the night's mysterious fire appears across the water that unspoken question of her own history forms in her heart. Soon, an unstoppable chain of events is triggered, leading Crow down a path of discovery and danger. Vivid and heart-wrenching, Lauren Wolk's Beyond the Bright Sea is a gorgeously crafted and tensely paced tale that explores the questions of identity, belonging, and the true meaning of family. Now, I'm going to read just the opening of this book, the prologue, and a couple of opening paragraphs to give you a feel for this. Why should you pick up a book like this and read it to your kids? What's the theme? What does it do for them? Hearing your voice tell a story, what does it do for your kids? Let's start this. Here's the prologue. This is just going to take a couple of minutes. Then we'll move on to our topic for tonight. Prologue. My name is Crow. When I was a baby, someone tucked me into an old boat and pushed me out to sea. I washed up on a tiny island like a seed riding the tide. It was Osh who found me and took me in, who taught me how to put down roots and thrive on both sun and rain and understand what it is to bloom. The island where we found each other was small but strong, anchored by a great pile of black rock that sheltered our cottage, a ramshackle place built from bits of lost ships, nestled on a bed of earth and sea muck, all alongside a small garden and the skiff that took us wherever our feet could not. We didn't need anything else, not in the beginning. At the low tide, we could cross easily to the next island, Cutty Hunk. Although let me start that again. At low tide, we could easily cross to the next island, Cutty Hunk, through shallows strewn with bootlace weed and minnows. At high tide, the cottage sat so close to the risen sea that it felt nearly like a boat itself. For a long time I was happiest when the water rose and set us apart, on our own, just the two of us decided everything there was to decide. And then one night, when I was 12, I saw a fire burning on Pennakees, the island where no one ever went, and I decided on my own that it was time to find out where I'd come from and why I'd been sent away. But I didn't understand what I was risking until I nearly lost it. And then a little bit into chapter 1. I just want you to get a feel for this book. I'll never know for sure when I was born, not exactly. On the morning Osh found me, I was just hours old, but he had no calendar and didn't much care what day it was. So we always marked my birth on whatever midsummer day felt right. The same was true of my other milestones, moments that had nothing to do with calendars, like the day Mouse showed up at our door, whisker thin, and decided the cottage was hers too, much as I had. Or the first time Osh let me take the tiller of our skiff while he sat in the bow and let the sun coddle his face for a while, his back against the mast, the fine spray veiling him in rainbows. Or the ebb tide when a white-sided dolphin stranded on our shore. Osh gone somewhere, and I came back from Cutty Hunk to find her rocking and heaving, her cries baby-like and afraid. I used my bare hands to scoop away the wet sand that stuck her fast, and I grabbed her crescent flukes and tugged, inch by inch, until the water lifted her enough so we both slipped back suddenly into the sea. She looked at me in the eye as she passed, as if to memorize what I was at that moment, as if to say that I should remember this too, no matter what happened later, none of which had anything to do with calendars. Still, I know I'd lived on that tiny island for 8 years before I began to be more than just curious about my name. The dream that woke me, wondering anew about my name, was full of stars and whales blowing and the lyrics of the sea. When I opened my eyes, I lay for a minute, watching Osh, and he stood at the stove, cooking pottage in a scabby pot. I sat up, rubbed the sleep from my eyes. "Why is my name Crow?" I asked. When Osh stirred the porridge and the spoon made a sound like a boat being dragged across the beach. "I've told you," he said. "You were hoarse with crying when you washed up here. You cawed over and over, so I called you Crow." That answer had always been enough before, but it didn't explain everything. And everything was what I had begun to want. "In English?" I asked. Osh sometimes spoke in a language I didn't know, his voice like music, especially when he prayed, but also when he painted his pictures of the islands and the sea. When I first asked Osh about it, he said that it was one of the few things he'd kept from life before the island, before me. Even though he did not speak it often, that other tongue flavored his English so he sounded different from everyone else. Miss Maggie called it his accent, but I thought maybe it was everyone else who had an accent. "No, not English at first," he said, "but people here speak English, so Crow." I stood and stretched the night out of my bones. My arms in the thin morning light looked almost nothing like wings. But when I stepped on a stool in front of our mirror, just big enough for a face, I could see the resemblance in the curve of my nose, the birth neck on my cheek that looked like a little feather, my hair darker than anyone else's, my eyes dark, my skin like Osh's after 6 months in the sun. I looked down at my skinny legs, my bony feet. Plenty of other reasons to be called Crow besides the way I had once cried. Osh himself had 3 names. Daniel, what Miss Maggie called him. The painter, what the summer people called him. Osh, what I called him since the time I could make words out loud. His real name was complicated, difficult for a small child to say. Osh was all I'd been able to manage, and Osh was what I'd called him ever since. "I wish I knew what my real name was," I said. For a moment Osh was still. "What do you mean by real?" he said. "My real name, the one my parents gave me." Osh was again silent for a while. Then he said, "You were brand new when you arrived here. I don't know that you ever even had a different name." He scooped some porridge into a bowl. "And if you did, I don't know how we'll ever learn what it was." I fetched 2 spoons. "What it is, you mean?" When Osh shrugged, the hair that lay on his shoulders rolled up like night waves. "Was, is, will be," he filled a second bowl. "It doesn't much matter, since you're here now, and you have a name." And the sound of the porridge thwopping into the crockery, the talk of the wooden spoon against the edge of the bowl, made me wonder who had named those things, and everything else in the world, including me. I could feel my curiosity strengthening, as if it were part of my bones, keeping pace with them as I grew. But more than that, more than simple curiosity, I had a nagging need to know what I didn't know. I wanted to know why there were pearls tucked inside some of the Cutty Hunk oysters, but not others. I wanted to know how the moon could drag the ocean in and out from a distance when it couldn't stir the milk in Miss Maggie's tea. I needed to know, among other things, why so many of the Cutty Hunk Islanders stayed away from me, as if they were afraid when I was smaller than any of them. I wondered whether it had anything to do with where I'd come from, but that didn't make any sense. What did where have to do with what? Or who? Something, yes, but not everything. And I needed to know all three. Osh didn't. When I asked questions about pearls or tides, he did his best to answer them, but when I looked beyond our life on the island, he became the moon itself, bent on tugging me back, as if I were made of sea instead of blood. I came a long, long way to be here, he once said, when I asked him about his life before the one we shared. As far as I could get from a place where people were my own brothers, jumped headlong into such terrible fighting that no one could see a thing through their bedlam. And for what? Over what? He shook his head. Over nothing worth the fight. So I refused to be one of them, and here I am, and here I'll stay. And the book goes on. That's just a taste. Get books like these. Read these things to your kids. I think this is one of the best ways to instill that spirituality that's missing in our kids. And by spirituality, I don't mean, as I said the day I talked about it, I don't mean instilling religion. I mean instilling a sense of spirituality, a sense of what they need to believe and believe in. So, there's my recommendation again. It's the last time I'll do it. These two books, Beyond the Bright Sea, and let's see if you can see them with my light here. I'm showing them, by the way, for the radio audience. Beyond the Bright Sea and Wolf Hollow, both written by Lauren Wolk. And you're going to enjoy these books. Read this kind of stuff to your kids. They need to hear you read it. They need to hear your voice saying it. All right, let's move on. The topic today, and we've only got 7 minutes left in this first segment because I spent a lot of it reading a little bit more and doing something I didn't think I was going to do. That was all off the top of my head. I just happened to see the books sitting there on the shelf, so I grabbed them and brought them over. And we're going to be talking again today about paganism. I want us to have a good idea of what it is we're talking about here. And paganism, as we started talking about yesterday, is something that is was always considered to be kind of like the way we use the word redneck. It was for the country folk. It was for the people that were outside of your circle of traditional, citified, cultural, civilized religions, organized religions. And so I want to look at what that's really all about and why, as we look through these pagan traditions, pagan beliefs, paganism itself, I want us to get a good overview of what paganism is, mostly because that's not the going concern, but that's the going topic. I'm looking at, because a lot of people have this particular issue, blending paganism with their Christianity, and hearing that it's incompatible, but wondering why it's incompatible, and if it's truly compatible. So, one thing I found in paganism is that it doesn't hold to anything that says that you can't respect and appreciate other people's belief systems, the differences. And fear doesn't have to win the day. And that's kind of where we left off yesterday. So if we look at some of the pagan traditions, let's take a few minutes now before the end of this segment and hit some of the traditions. As used in the modern movement, pagan is a broad term that encompasses all sorts of traditions. These traditions vary widely in the beliefs, in the practices, in what you do. And just as like Seventh-day Adventists, what do you know about Seventh-day Adventism? And Catholics differ greatly from each other, but both are considered part of a Christianity. So look at Baptist tradition, look at Catholic tradition, and you'll see differences within Christianity. Of course, Baptists will tell you Catholics aren't Christians. So you've got that whole thing going. That's how different they are, yet they're all still under Christianity, Catholicism or Protestantism. Now, according to, there's an old study, 1997, the Jorgensen and Russell study. The largest of the pagan traditions is Wicca, comprising approximately 47% of the movement. Now, those numbers may have changed since all of this was written down. But Wiccans follow an earth-centered calendar of 8 festivals a year, and we went over that last week sometime, which we set out to explore and delineate with that chart I put up, if you remember that. I think I've still got that here. We can look at that again really quick. There it is, pagan wheel. All right, you see that? Those of you not on... Oh, look, my picture stays in the bottom right. I'm not sure why. But this particular wheel shows you the different festivals, and if you're listening on radio, you can't see it. You've got, of course, the solstices, the equinoxes, and the in-between festivals. Let's put it that way. All right? So I'm going to take that down, and pagan wheel, down. All right. So you got a chance to see that if you're watching on video. Sorry, those of you who are not watching the video. So let's see if I lost my place in my notes. I did not. And so all these different things, the polarities of the day and night, the male, female, and so on, symbolic representations of spirit. Gods, goddesses, the way reality works. Any view is acceptable in paganism, and various Wiccan traditions may emphasize one view over another. Most Wiccans observe the ethic contained in the Wiccan Rede, which states, "If it harm none, do what you will." And we explore the implications of this in everything we put forward about paganism so far, and we'll probably get into it a little bit more sometime in the future here. But there's a variety of paths and traditions within Wicca itself, including Gardnerian, Alexandrian, Dianic, Fairy, Strega, Corellian, Solitary, to name a few, and so on. And so even within paganism, you've got Wiccanism, which is a part of paganism, represents a little less than half as of the compiling of those numbers. And out of that, you got all these different traditions as well. It's like looking at Christianity with all its different denominations and traditions. And so the next largest tradition in paganism, according to the Pagan Spring Gathering tribal survey, is the eclectic. And that's at 27% of them. And so we're going to leave it at that for this segment, that little tidbit of information. I'm going to go out for 2 minutes. We're going to come back. We'll pick this up where we left off. Hang on. Hey gang, welcome back from that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. You can find the audio version at odysy1.com, and you can join the other Intrepids on the live video simulcast over on my YouTube channel, Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on and join us. You don't have to say anything in the chat room, but if you want to join the video and see what's going on in the chat room, you don't even have to identify yourself. You won't even show up unless you say something. So come on over, take a peek, see if it's your cup of tea or not. And I want to thank you all for being here. And as I have said before, as I started to say yesterday, I have had millions of hours of study and research over the last 40 years, but I hold a high school diploma. I have no letters behind my name, despite the fact that I attended college into my junior year, dropped out, did not finish my bachelor's, and then was recruited by a small seminary to start work on my master's degree, which I did as they tutored me in the balance of my bachelor's, which I also dropped out from about 37 years ago, and I went into advertising, where I spent the rest of my life. And I'm now a freelancer, and I've researched all those years and studied all of those years. So, there you go. I have, I don't know how many hours of study, literally, when it comes down to it. Hundreds of thousands maybe, hours of study over 40 years with no degrees other than my high school. So I hope you're enjoying my research, and I hope you're getting something out of it. And I hope you're encouraged to study. You don't need a degree to study and research. You just need a degree to placate all those other guys with degrees who say you cannot be a peer of ours unless you have letters behind your name. Doesn't matter what you know. So there you go. All right, let's move on. We were talking over here about traditions of paganism. You got shamanism is a tradition. Asatru, Druidism, Celtic traditionalism, ceremonial magic, and family traditions, among others. You know, as far as magic goes, this isn't a section where we're going to be talking much about magic, but I have performed some magic spells in my day. And it seems to me that no matter what tradition you seem to be in, paganism or Celtic or Catholic or Christian Protestantism, there are spells that we practice. When we're saying prayers, we're performing spells. It may not be under the category of magic, but you are trying to harness the elements of the universe to work on your behalf when you say a prayer. I know there was one that I used. I'm going to tell you this spell. It was given to me by a friend. And I don't think this is private types of information. It's pretty simple. I was looking for something that would, as we all want, increase a little prosperity. I was feeling a little down and out monetarily, financially, and I'm raising a family, and I wanted things to succeed. And so I was looking for something not to drop something in my lap that I didn't deserve, but to help me set my mind about doing the right things to attract a little bit of wealth or prosperity to me. And so I was told to take incense, whatever kind I wanted. When I burn incense, I burn frankincense, raw resin on the stick, or I use the charcoal and burn the block resin. And so I burned a little incense. Then I was told, take a tall candle, preferably white or yellow, I think it was, pale yellow, and take a little knife and carve in symbols that mean something to you about prosperity. If it's a dollar sign, carve that in. If it's a house, carve that in. Happiness, however you illustrate that concept. And they're just little stick figurey things. And of course, you can't do a whole lot carving in a candle wax. And so I carved a bunch of images of things that represented prosperity to me, of representing getting above the curve, of taking care of needs, things like that. And then when I was all done with that, incense is still burning. I was to take some oil, and I had a specific oil that he recommended, and I wiped that oil all over the candle, and then I was to take the ashes from my incense and rub that into the oil, so the ashes set in the recesses of what I had carved into the candle. And then I was to set that candle up and burn it, and let it burn until it burned itself out. And so that was a spell that I cast. It wasn't calling on angelic or demonic beings. It was, in a sense, it started as a meditative work, and then it was setting the atmosphere for me to hopefully set a stage for prosperity coming in. And so this is what I mean by, I'm sure there are magics that are out there, ceremonial magics. Ceremonial magics might go a little more highbrow than that. You see ceremonial magics if you watch Mass in a Catholic church. They just don't call it that anymore. You can look at family traditions. These are traditions that paganism has. Family traditions, among others. Shamanism is an ancient and often a very cross-cultural practice that involves the use of trance work, spirit guides, power animals to assist the shaman in performing a work such as healing or divination. And I want to stop on something there. The practice of a shaman. I want to tell you about one experience I had with a shaman. I didn't plan to talk about this, and some of you have heard this story before, but I didn't elaborate on this part of it. Way back in 2013, January, was going to be my first time ever traveling to Egypt. And that was only 6 years ago, 2013, January. And so I was prepping for that, but late in 2012, December of 2012, a friend had died. Now, many of you know who this friend is, if I were to mention him by name. And I don't think it's any problem anymore to mention him by name. Enough time has passed. But we held our Paradigm Symposium, the first one, in October of 2012. And one of our speakers was Philip Coppens, who was an author, also one of the talking heads, regular talking heads, on Ancient Aliens. And we had the cast of Ancient Aliens and their production company, Prometheus, had come and attended the first Paradigm Symposium. And they comprised some of our speakers that year. And Philip Coppens told me at the event, now mind you, this is in October, mid-October of 2012, said he hadn't been feeling right lately, and he was a little concerned about some things. He's falling asleep at times. He didn't want to fall asleep and stuff like that. And he said, I'm going to go get it checked out at the doctor when I get back home. They had to go from our event to something else and then going back home. End of October. And somewhere in there, between the end of October and the middle of November, we heard that Philip had a very rare form of cancer, angiosarcoma. It was cancer of the heart. And he was declining very quickly. He seemed normal when I saw him in October, but by December, 2 months later, he passed away. He died on the 30th of December in 2012. And I remember, and some of you heard this part of the story, when I learned of this death, I wept just profusely. I didn't know and understand why it was affecting me so deeply. It was almost uncontrollable. Every time I thought of it, it would take over. And I just happened to be, at that time, that Christmas to New Year's week, had a good friend of mine, Micah Hanks, was staying with us for a week. He was visiting from Asheville, North Carolina. And he and my wife actually thought something was wrong with me after, because this went on for days, 2, 3, 4 days. And even I couldn't understand it. And I was a wreck. And I didn't know why. It wasn't like Philip Coppens was my brother. It wasn't like, I mean literal brother, a family member. We were friends for, at that time, less than 2 years. We knew each other. We were acquaintances. We were friends. He wrote a foreword for my book. I wrote an article for him for his magazine. We'd been on each other's radio shows. We respected each other. And he came and spoke at my symposium. But, so I would classify him as a friend, but, we had never gone out drinking together. We'd never hauled a dead body off into the woods and buried it together. So, we were friends. And so I wasn't understanding why I was reacting so emotionally, so viscerally, and so uncontrollably at times. And so a few days after his death, I get a call from a friend of mine. This is where you'll see the context to what we're talking about. A friend of mine who is a shaman. He called me out of the blue one day, and he said, "Scotty, how you doing?" And I said, "Hey, David, good. How you doing?" And by the way, David had been a shaman for many years. Not just self-acclaimed. He's a shaman. And he asked me what was going on. "What's going on?" I said, "Not much." And I said, "What's up, man?" And he says, "Well, let me put it this way." He says, "You remember a while back I told you how I would sometimes get communication from the spirits that would give me information?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I could be reading a book and information would be imparted to me, or a song would play and it would give me something that I needed to do." And he says, and on rare occasions, I would hear audible voices. I'd be sitting at my desk and I'd hear a voice. And I said, "Yeah, remember you telling me that?" He says, "Well, about 10 minutes ago, he says, I'm sitting here at my desk and I heard an audible voice say, 'Call Scotty.'" I thought that was extraordinary. I still think that's extraordinary. And he says, "So I picked up my phone and I called you." He says, "Is there something going on? What's going on with you, brother?" And so I said, "Well, that's funny." And I said, and he knew Philip Coppens, and Philip Coppens was a good, better friend of his than me. And I started to cry as I'm talking to him. I said, "Look, this is what this has been doing to me every time I bring it up." And it was almost uncontrollable at that point. And when I calmed it down, I says, "I don't know what this is and what's causing this." And he said to me, he said, he says, "I'm going to tell you something." He says, "This might seem odd and not a direct answer to your question." He says, "But here's what I get." He says, "You're leaving for Egypt in about a week." He says, "I'm going to tell you something." He says, "Keep your eyes open and your ears open and your heart open." He said, "Something is going to happen to you in Egypt that's going to change you for the rest of your life." He says, "So be attentive." I said, "What's going to change me?" He says, "That's not important." He says, "It's important for you to be ready for it." Well, okay. That ambiguity always throws me off a little bit when it comes to either psychic abilities, shamanic abilities, and things like that. And so we talked a little bit more, and I hung up the phone, and I seemed to feel a lot better after that. He wasn't placating me. He didn't say, "Oh, there, it'll be better now," or anything like that. So I just felt I got it off my chest to him. And so a week passes. I travel off to Egypt, and about a week after there, and this is the story you'll recognize, so I won't go into it in detail, but I was at the tomb of Senenmut, this guy in this bust behind me here. This is the guy that I wrote about and believed was the historical Moses. And so I'm at his tomb, which is down in it's not a ditch. It's, you got the main road that goes up to the temple, and just down into the gully, if you will, below the cliff faces, is his tomb. And he was the architect, the grand architect for the temple where we were visiting, Deir el-Bahre, Hatshepsut's temple. And so I'm standing there in the broad daylight, and I think it was as nonchalant as I was lighting up a cigarette. I said, I said, "Senenmut," and I'm talking to nobody. "Senenmut, are you really Moses, the way I think you might be? I said, Moses, did you really ever exist the way we think you did? And I lit the cigarette, and it was like, as I was doing this, there was no big emotional outburst or anything like, please, God's descendant, tell me. It wasn't that. It was like I was just questioning out loud. Is this who you really are? Am I on the right path? And I lit my cigarette, and poof, it was like I was hit out of left field by this wave of overwhelming emotion. And I dropped my cigarette, and I had suddenly tears streaming down my face. They were dripping. It was dripping off of my chin. It was coming so profusely. And I remember yelling out loud. I was waving my hands, and I said, what the F? And I can't say the word on the radio. What the F? I said, what the hell am I crying about? What is this? And I was mystified at the time. And so we'll leave that experience there. But later, when I was back home, about a month later, I talked to David, my shamanic friend, and I told him about this. And he said, yeah. He says, and what did that do for you? And we started talking about that whole experience. And I got to tell you, it did exactly what he said. Because of that event and other things that I learned about that event along the way, changed my outlook on life forever. And it changed the way I viewed things. It changed me as a person. Because one of the things I found out was that this was very connected to Philip Coppens. That, unbeknownst to me at the time I was there, he had made claims that he was a reincarnation of that guy, Senenmut. Not the reincarnation, a reincarnation. His wife had told me about it, and she said that on the same day I had this experience, which was written about in my journal here, and I read that to you guys a while back. I might as well grab it now. If you've heard this before, just enjoy the retelling of it. I wrote in my journal after this because I sat down there and needed to write a little bit about not understanding what I was experiencing. And it was on Tuesday, February 4th of 2013. And on that same day, his widow told me, she said she had a vision of Philip appearing to her and his brother and standing in the room there. They saw him physically materialize. And that was the same day, almost the same hour that I was experiencing this at the tomb of Senenmut. Now, I had sat down about a half an hour later in front of the tomb, my back on the front entryway to the tomb of Senenmut. I scooped a bunch of sand into my pockets, my cargo pockets, which I still have. And do I even have them here? No, they're in different jars over there. But I wrote this, and I said, Tuesday, February 4th, 2013, tomb TT353, which was Senenmut's tomb, one of his tombs. I'm sitting in the sand outside the unused tomb of Senenmut. I stood in this little natural grotto and was overwhelmed with emotion, not sure precisely why. Tears, many tears. I'm not even sure if Senenmut is Moses, not even so sure that Moses even existed as I was taught. But someone is here. Someone grabbed my emotions, and I don't want to let go. That's what I wrote at the time when I was sitting there, and at the time that this happened. So, shamanic visions, shamanic tradition, these are all things that come with paganism, that come with these different Wiccan beliefs. This is shamanic belief, which includes, as I said, shamanism, Astru, Druidism, Celtic traditionalism, ceremonial magic, family traditions, amongst others, shamanism, itself as an ancient and often cross-cultural practice that involves the use of trance work, spirit guides, power animals to assist the shaman in performing a work such as healing or divination. That's why I brought up the example I did, as long a story as that was. And the Asatru devote themselves to Nordic, Germanic, or Icelandic deities. Druidism is a revival tradition that desires to recreate the Druidic system, and may or may not combine with Celtic traditionalism, in which groups or clans attempt to create a pre-Christian Gaelic religion and society. And Strega is an Italian tradition. Hey! How do you know you're an Italian shaman? Because it's like this. Hey, the spirit's speaking. So it's an Italian tradition of Wicca. Ceremonial magic draws on the works of Aleister Crowley and the Order of the Golden Dawn. That's a prominent occult society founded in Britain in 1887. It generally revolves around specific rituals, words, the use of tools for gaining specific results. Family traditions include practices and beliefs handed down through a family for many generations, which are often informal and may contain no overt ritual, and in which the connection to paganism is sometimes really downplayed or combined with Christian elements. Now, I'm not sure which David is, which tradition he is. You could probably ask him. His name is David Weatherly, and you can check him out. And there's my beautiful wife stepping in and now stepping out. So you missed her for the day. So you can find more detailed descriptions of all these pagan traditions in Chapter 1 of this book, which I had sitting around here. I made some notes, and now I don't know where it is. It's on a book on Christian paganism. I made a note there, say check Chapter 1, and I don't have the book. So anyway, despite their differences, all of these traditions are considered to be part of modern paganism. It's an umbrella term that includes a number of traditions, in the same manner that Christianity contains a number of denominations. And to help visualize paganism and its traditions, you can look at this major umbrella and try to understand that paganism is the overall, with all these things beneath. I like to use a circle, too, and say a circle with many dots in the middle. Paganism's a religion, just like other religions. It addresses ultimate issues concerning the nature and the purpose of life and the realm of the spirit. It's ordained clergy. It observes liturgical years and religious holy days. And many pagans organize themselves into groups, which may be called circles, churches, covens, groves. They don't generally have missionaries or proselytize or anything like that. And there's not really one central hierarchy or dogma. And some individual traditions, however, may adopt a hierarchical structure and promote specific teachings. And I will say most pagans and most of these circles and groups that I find do share the element of believing that there are gods, more than one god. It's a polytheistic view. They're more linked to nature and the flows of the earth, the heavens. Those are some commonalities, though they are not dogmas. It's not something that if you violate that, you violate some church tradition. It's that you could violate the natural cycle of the earth. That's about it. If you want to say, well, the summer equinox is different for us, well, okay, but you're missing the day if you do it on a different day. So generally speaking, diversity is pretty much a hallmark of paganism, and most pagans would find it fairly inappropriate to insist that all pagans believe the same things or be organized under the same structure. And so I want you to ask what you think. If you are in the Christian tradition or not a pagan tradition, what is it that governs the way you believe things? We hit on this a bit yesterday and the day before. Are there strictures and mandates imposed on you to say you must believe things this way in order for your spirituality to be real and right? Now, let's say Christianity is right, and it says that the Son of God came and died for your sins because mankind is innately sinful. And so you must accept him to be right with God. If God is the creator and that's the way he made things work, then that's the way he made things work. The problem is, we don't see him go out of his way to give us any information other than something that was written down thousands of years ago. And so while you might believe that, I don't mean that to offend your sensibilities if you believe that, but if you believe that, then that's the basis for your inner spirituality. The question is, what do you do when there's something else? Can you blend other traditions into that? Or is that the sole answer to the question? And I got to leave you with that because we're at the end of the show. I want to thank you for being here tonight, folks. We're going to be back after the weekend. I want you to enjoy your weekend. Think about these things. Take time. 2 things I want you to do. Take time to meditate and think on these things. Take time to read to your kids. How about that? Going back to what we did at the very opening of the show. So thanks for being here. We'll see you in a couple of days. Have a good weekend. Good night.